Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
What is the number?
Yeah, I know. Andrew will definitely stop recording 3 times before we're done recording as well. That's been his really bad habit. So don't touch that button again, Andrew.
Just don't make the universal sign for cut. Like, don't go like this.
This is the only place we can use our hands. I have to be demonstrative in a very small space.
So when I'm talking, I can just, there's buttons too. Look at, I can hit buttons.
Yeah,
you're muting
don't
yourself.
mute yourself while you're talking, Scott. Good grief.
Actually, maybe
buttons?
you should.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can push all these buttons.
All of us have wanted to mute Scott at some point.
Echo cancellation. Hold on. I'm going to turn it off.
Yeah, we definitely need some reverb here. Some Melamu reverb is what we're going to need.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, Scott, take it away.
Wait, I'm starting?
No,
Dan,
I mean, tell him what Melamu is. This is Scott's favorite term.
Yeah, it's the awe-inspiring sheen of glory that that emanates from deities, and it is given all kinds of causal attributes and victories and things like that. Actually, it shows up a little bit in this thing, but there is a lot to say about this. I was actually reading a dissertation earlier today on this topic, and it is a 1,000-page dissertation.
Oh.
So we can go as long as you would like.
Yeah, well, so 10 to 15 minutes is what we've got for the first one. We could extend this to 14 episodes if you want. All right, are we ready to roll here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hold on,
okay.
wait, you said it that way. Hold on, you said it that way, then I can think about. All right.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
What am I supposed to do something now?
Nah, don't you worry. You just sit back and take cues and prompts from us. All right, let's go. Hey, I'm Dan. We're back for another edition of the Pillar Podcast 2.0. This is where we try to revive the old and much beloved podcast from yesteryear, but we try to do so in a way that will be much less labor intensive on the production side. So we're changing the format a little bit, and we brought in some current and former students to help with it. But our goal in the podcast is still the same, as you heard in the introduction. We want you, our listeners, to be equipped in some small way to engage with the God of Scriptures more faithfully, no matter what your context might be. We're also excited to have a chance to celebrate some of our incredible faculty with you, as well as some others in the Pillar orbit, and want to give you guys some sense of what possible next steps might look like for you, whether you want to study with us or partner with us in some way or have a workshop hosted in your area at some point. We're doing this to serve you and to connect with you, in other words. So with me today is Dr. Scott Booth, Associate Professor of Hebrew Bible with us at Pillar Seminary.
Yo.
And I'm also joined today by Andrew and Susie, one of our newly minted grads. Congratulations. Woohoo. What's left for you, Susie? We're still waiting on some grades, perhaps? I'm not sure.
Yeah, some grades would be great.
Not from me. I did it.
I have not received anything in my inbox about my.
So we will clear this up perhaps in another podcast when we talk about our grading systems. That'll be a real illuminating podcast. Not with us today are Joe and Greg and also Dr. Moore, who is recovering from back surgery at the moment. So prayers for Dr. Moore would be appreciated. Otherwise, he'd be here with us. He'll be a regular presence with us and make sure that we stay grounded and focused on why all this stuff matters for disciple making and for the church, whatever our ministry context is. So Scott, in the spirit of the way the podcast used to start, I used to paralyze you with some random movie quote and you would just be so confused you'd stop. I have some movie quotes here and I'm going to need to see how many of these you can identify. Is that all right if we start that way?
Yes.
All right. This is kind of a lightning round here. You ready? Want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh,
by the way, I watched
so
that
proud.
during my first detention.
I don't know what that means. Is this recently? Did you get put in detention?
When I was in detention, I guess we should do a different podcast on that. But during my first detention of all time, I will say, just for my mom's sake, the first of two. It was Halloween, and the teacher felt terrible, and so we watched Dumb and Dumber, which I had never seen because my mom wouldn't allow me because she was an '80s Christian, which is like the best of the Christians.
Yeah,
that's what
I know.
Nate Bargatze says. So, anyway, we got Dumb and Dumber and candy for detention, and I was like, I know my path.
That's pretty awesome. I also would.
So you decided to become an educator.
I would be detained as well. So here's another one that I'm sure has a story. We've already done a podcast on this, but you ever been to a Turkish prison?
I don't know the movie quote, but it does make me think of things.
Airplane.
Is it airplane?
Yeah.
That is literally the least offensive quote you could have chosen.
I chose it for that reason. There were a few others that could have been. Okay, here's this one. I'm kind of a big deal.
Ron Burgundy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. These go to 11. This is a tough one.
Hold on.
No, I've forgotten the name of it too. I can see it.
This is a reference to the volume to 11. Hold on. It's a Spinal Tap reference in a different movie.
No. That's the Spinal Tap. That's when he's pointing to his knobs.
It's just in Spinal Tap?
Yeah,
I thought it was... Okay, sorry. I thought it was another movie referencing Spinal Tap.
But I have nipples, Greg. Could you milk me?
I don't know what that is.
It's from Meet the Parents. That's Robert De Niro and Ben
I hate
Stiller.
that movie so much. I hate it so hard. It's so stressful.
Well, so that's a good segue into the actual content of our podcast. Scott, we asked you what you were going to podcast on, and you gave us a really cryptic sentence, and we tried to suss out from that quite what would be happening. You told us you were going to look at sun god stuff, fate declaration, Namtar, and how it gives us insight into Ruth, Exodus 19, and Psalm 139. And so I followed up and said, what the heck? Can you give us a little more so we can map this out? And you said, I'm going to talk about bitter fate and the plot of Ruth and bitter waters. So this is not self-evident to any of us.
To Susie it is, because she went through it. Maybe.
Susie, what are we going to talk about today?
Sure. Very clear.
Oh, she knows exactly what it is. Okay, so I'm working on a paper right now. Here's focus. So the idea, with the ancient Near Eastern stuff, kind of like go to kind of how they envision the whole cosmos, all of the universe together, right?
Yeah.
So the basics is this, and it pans out like in a ton of different ways. But like imagine so the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, right? Standard stuff. But if you have as the sun god rises in the east and sets in the west, and while the sun is up, it sees kind of everything that's going around, what's happening, right? So then when the sun god drops into the west, where does it go? What happens? It ends up going to the underworld and cycles through back around to the east and pops up again. So this is kind of normal stuff. The sun god is the god. He's in charge of judging and justice, and also weirdly future and a fate declaration. I know it all sounds weird, but here's the basic idea. Every day, in this world that we exist in, and the sun kind of governs, is over us, right? It looks at what's going on, and the sun god renders judgment. At night, then, you can send messages down to the underworld, to the gods who are holding court. So you may have heard of the divine council and things like that. You probably picture them up in heaven. In Mesopotamia, at least. It's
Do you mean
underworld.
you, the diviners, can send word down?
No, I mean you. Oh, yeah. So diviners in particular can send word down. You have to be a specialist to know how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Not just anybody. But you could. It would just cost you a pretty penny. Because you got to pay for the diviners, you got to pay for the sacrifices. There's all this stuff, this special knowledge that can happen. Right. So then the sun god goes into the underworld and he holds court. He holds court with other deities while you are up here on Earth, and other like deities that are like the stars are also participating in this whole thing, and you want to render some kind of judgment or verdict, right? Where you're like, hey, I don't know, maybe there's this thing happening in my life that's terrible, and a ghost got out from the underworld, and it's like wreaking havoc on my life. I don't know, whatever, right? You're trying to understand what's going to happen tomorrow, and you kind of in some way impact it. And so you run this ritual called extra spicy, and no, it's not.
You took away the dad joke. That was the only thing I had was extra spicy.
Right, it's called whatever. It's called. I can't do it now that I've said extra spicy. I went backwards. I'm supposed to do the dad jokes. Yeah, extra spicy.
I was like, that's my favorite kind of McChicken. Is the extra spicy.
Extra spicy chicken, please.
Right. So what you do is you send word down to the underworld through some specialist who knows how to pray and do all the things. And then the sun god, along with other deities, like sometimes the moon god, right? Because sometimes the moon isn't in the sky at night. So when the moon god isn't in the sky at night, also down in court, all other deities down there. And sometimes there's some people down there like Gilgamesh and his buddies. And then they hold court over whatever it is that you're asking for or asking about. Then the sun, like they render their verdict, and they send it up to you in a letter, like they email it. But they email it like in a lamp. It sounds really weird, but the idea is like in the ancient world, you used to like write everything down on a clay tablet, and then you would seal over it like an envelope, a clay envelope. So the lamb itself is like an analog for this, right? So the lamb, what's written is on the liver, but the lamb is kind of the rest of the animal is the envelope over the message. Right? They actually ran backup messages, which is super cool. So, sorry, I didn't do a tangent, but I was thinking of one.
Way to go, buddy.
Thanks. So anyway, so you send this message down. You're like, hey, deities, this is what I want to have happen. Like whatever's going wrong, or please X, Y, and Z. Then the sun rises, sends up his message, and the sun rises. And when the sun like breaches the horizon, boom, the fate is locked. Right? So your fate has been set.
Like the trial is over when the sun returns.
The trial is over. You've sent it up. You get the message back from the divine, and you're like, dang it. Or you're like, woohoo. And then like the sun rises, and like maybe it's like a slight, like the sun like rises a little sliver. And then like the sun and the storm god rise at the same time. And because as the sun rises, the wind kicks up and like inflames the sun, and it goes across, and everything is carried out. Sounds super weird, but there's tons of biblical stuff about this. So when
assuming this understanding or the way the world is understood, is that what you mean?
Yeah. So the way let's just go like this is the way I'm talking about the world. That world working, generally speaking, is hugely prominent, like in Iraq. And probably into northern Syria. But there's evidence in the Bible that they're aware of it in the south. So here's where it gets kind of neat. When a deity has a good destiny or a good fate to declare on you, they do things like make their face shine on you. Right? Or when it's particularly bad, it's called bitter. That's where I'm going to go with the Ruth stuff and the Exodus, like right afterwards, and the bitter waters, because that story is fascinating for this stuff. What I'm trying to say is that there's a cognitive framing that happens here, and because there is some distance culturally between these two spots, you have to be careful, and you can't say one to one. But there is enough evidence in Scripture that this stuff is present, that to say, hey. Whether the details transfer slightly differently or not, we're not really sure, but we're sure that at least something is transferring. Because, for example, we know that the storm god is involved typically with thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening, right? But in the morning, when it rises with the sun, it is not. It's a gentle breeze. Now, if you're like, you should be thinking Elijah, and right, where it's thunderbolt and he gets thunder and he goes back out and the Lord comes in the gentle breeze. Whatever is happening there, we could do in other podcasts, it's at least involved with these categories. Psalm 139 is another one. If I ascend to heaven, there you are. And if I make my bed in Sheol, there you are, right? This very sun god language that happens. And in the end of that psalm, he asks the Lord to judge. So if you read Psalm 139, it feels really random because he's like, oh, God, you made me in the innermost parts. You knew me. You're like, oh, it's so sweet. And he's like, judge my enemies. You're like, oh, my gosh, like, where did that come from? Well, if you're running like in their world, this ability to see everything is connected with the sun, which is connected with judging. And so Psalm 139 is not crazy. Right? Okay, so that's kind of like general overview. There's
are
tons
these
of
explicit claims over and against the sun god on behalf of Yahweh, or is it just kind of we assume these categories and Yahweh does it? I mean, is Psalm 139 polemical in some way?
Oh, I think that's paper number 2. The other paper, so the first paper I'm writing is different, but the second paper is looking at Psalm 139 in these sun god categories.
Okay.
And what you find typically, I can't remember the author right now. It's Yahweh Among the Gods, I think is the book. But basically, like major deities will kind of display, it's a known thing in the ancient world that a god shows how awesome he is by also having the characteristics of other deities, by assuming those roles. And so to see the Lord doing doing the things that the sun god's doing, he's communicating to the people, no, don't go to the sun god. Come to me, because I do that thing. And we know that that's an issue because in Ezekiel, they actually have a sun god thing happening. So anyway, so all of this stuff it's all part of their world and part of the way they think about things. And there's tons of places to go, like in terms of like if something bad is happening to you, what do you do? Right? And these kind of things help you see what their reflex would be. And what does it mean when we say God is judge? These kind of things help you see in the Old Testament what they're thinking, right? Yeah. And he lifts my face is also part of this language. Like a lot of the language in Scripture as part of Psalms it overlaps with this stuff. So because it's just the way they see the world working. Yeah.
Would his mercies are new every morning kind of trigger that as well?
Right, I guess.
Yes. There you go. That's all right. Every morning, right? That's that. Basically, you're locking the fate that morning. When the sun rises, the fate for that day is set, and that the psalm is saying, "Hey," and that day is set as mercy. It's set as mercy, right? There's so many things. As soon as you start like unpacking this, it goes into Leviticus. It's in Genesis. It's so fun to play with. Where I want to play is in really the story of bitter waters, which seems completely random if you read it. And then also, maybe if we have time to look at Ruth. But the payoff is the same. Like it's the same lesson in both instances. So, can I read it? Can I read the Exodus?
Yeah, let's start with Bitter Waters, and maybe the second episode that we'll just keep running. We can cover Ruth.
There's lots of places to go on the other fronts. But
so real quick before we jump into that. So Scott, if I can just kind of reframe what you were saying, it sounds like the deal is by understanding the environment in which these people were living, we can have more of a finger on the pulse, so to speak, or more of an understanding of what the significance of these words would have been in their context. These concepts would have been in their own context. Now, one question I kind of have in my mind with respect to this before we jump into all that is you're noting, I don't know if polemical is the right word, but kind of a reappropriation or recontextualization of some of these ideas in light of the Hebrew Bible. Now, I know some folks might argue, though, right, that this is kind of like syncretistic or like kind of, if you take like a history of religions kind of approach, right? They're just kind of using the words that they're used to because we don't actually have, like a pure Israelite religion at any point. That's what some people say. It's not what I'm saying. So do you have any kind of maybe like a 1 minute response to that?
I think, It depends, like, because it's super involved. The details matter in that discussion, right? Like, on dates of, like, when is this stuff written? So where are they when they're writing it? All that stuff matters when you're having that conversation. But on the whole, I think I would take a posture of agreeing. And it sounds really terrible, but it's not. Basically, the Lord is working in their framework to basically say, stop looking over there, start looking over here. Basically change the name. So rather than the sun god who rises and sets and does these things and sets these things for you, realize it's the one who got you out of Egypt who sets these things for you. The one who got you Egypt is the one who made these things. The one who got you out of Egypt is the one who will rescue you from the Philistines. So stop going to these different places. So in a sense, I would say to them, I'd say, yeah, like it should be quite familiar. It's just, so if you were to compare the history of Marduk versus the history of Yahweh, there would be a lot of overlap, because Marduk was a tiny god. When Babylon exploded, he became a big god. And then when Babylon faded, he went away. And that's a very ancient Near Eastern pattern. And what happens with the Lord, you can run in a secular way, you can run that and say, it looks very similar. And yeah, it absolutely should. However, a lot of it's just human. There are very different aspects of your life, right? So you have aspects like where you're feeling grief and you just want comfort. You have aspects where you feel like there's been an injustice and you want justice. There's aspects where you don't know what to do and you want guidance, right? And so it is reasonable to have all of those aspects of a human being's life addressed. And so that you say that it's all subsumed under one deity, well, yeah, like he would definitely talk to them like that. That makes sense. Even the lovey-dovey parts of Song of Songs.
So it is, which we have actually.
Even doves, get it? Milky doves, eyes.
Which we're actually going to talk about Song of Songs in another podcast. But so it's almost kind of like a divinely ordained, like, revisionist history in a sense.
Yeah.
Which actually kind of reminds me of something that we do want to talk about in a podcast at some point, which is the spiritual autobiography type of assignment that Dr. Moore has all of our students do. But all right, I've monopolized the time enough. Go ahead. And I think where you jumping us Exodus 19?
Okay, yeah, 15. Well, there is cool stuff in 19, because in 19 you get the thunderbolt and lightning, very frightening stuff, which is one aspect of the storm god. Because as soon as it's the storm god and the sun god who jointly kind of render this thing. So you'll see both things in scripture. But here's Exodus 15. They just crossed. Like, the Lord is just like, well, I led you out, right? I led you out of we had the Red Sea thing, which is another podcast we should do. Not the Red Sea, but we'll get to that, right? But we get over, and the first thing that happens to them after they sing lovely songs, like they're all singing together, and then this happens. Then Moses, this is Exodus 15:22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Reed Sea, and they went to the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness, and they didn't find any water. When they came to Mara, by the way, Mara means bitter. When they came to Mara, they couldn't drink any water of Mara because it was bitter. So they named the place Mara, which is bitter. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we going to drink? So he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and they threw it in the water, and the water became sweet. Now, sweet is also a word that will show up in when they say good fate. Like, if a deity does something, renders a good decision for you, it's called sweet. If it's sometimes it's called lots of different things: pleasant, pleasing. It's called different things, or good, normal. But sometimes it's called sweet. So you're moving the thing from a bitter water to a sweet water. All right. Then the Lord says something fascinating. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule. There he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, keep all of his statutes, then I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord, your healer. Now, that sounds like, it's like, sometimes whenever you read in the Bible, and it's just like, the Lord or Jesus says something like one time at band camp, and you're like, where are you going? Right? You have no idea where it's coming from. Because where does, like, I won't put any diseases on you come from? why did he bring that up? Like, no one, they didn't bring it up. Like, now they're sitting there thinking, like, geez, dude, maybe he will, right? And then, but that's not what's happening. The whole context here is the fate declaration. So what they would, by just from their cultural upbringing, they knew when they came to bitter water or water that isn't good to drink, they would see bitter fate. And if there is a bitter fate, then you have irritated the deity. Now, they've just watched the Egyptians irritate the deity and how that worked out for them. So their grumbling is a theological grumbling. As soon as it is bitter, they are actually questioning fate. Like, why are we having this bitter fate? And then, interestingly, when it says Moses cried out to the Lord, and it says the Lord showed him a log, like, what? And he tossed it in and it becomes sweet. Like, that's nonsense. The word for showed him a log, like to show it to him, is it's related to the word for Torah. It's not like your normal I make you see something. It's like he taught him.
Yeah.
The other thing about bitter fate is it's also sick. Like, it's wrong. So it needs healing. So bitterness needs healing, right? So it's what's going on here is the Lord is immediately running them into their theology, saying, no, look to me in these instances. I am not going to bring on you bitter fate. That is not what I do. I will bring sweetness. I heal things. I remove the bitter fate, which is exactly what he did by pulling them out of Egypt. He removes the bitter fate of the Egyptians. And then he draws them into bitter water, which confuses them. He says, no. Look at me. Do what I say. And this will be sweet. That was it. So the whole story turns on Moses going, okay, I'll do what you taught me or showed me. That's why the log is there. So it's a representation of a shift of fate. Basically, the Lord is identifying sweet fate with obeying him, doing what he says. All right, does that part so far make sense, right? So the sun rises and it sets your fate. And if the fate that was decided for you is bad, we call it bitter. And if the fate that's decided for you is good, we call it sweet or good or pleasing or something like that, right? And then the Lord says, hey, the mechanism is actually follow me. It's like you just look at the Lord and you should be thinking sweet fate, not bitter fate.
So we should probably wrap up part one here. And I think this is going to give us...
Let me do Ruth.
Hold on. Let's pick this back up.
Because Ruth is only like 2 sentences in the same regard. It's not like a whole podcast on it.
Oh, okay.
I do have a question, which I'm glad to edit out, Dan, if you don't want it in there. But so how would, because we talked about, you gave us the context of like other ancient Near Eastern religions and cultures trying to discern their fate, right? But you didn't actually, I don't think, in there talk about how they would affect their fate. So that would be, I think, kind of the main trigger here, right? Is like, so Yahweh is providing one way of getting a good judgment, right? So how is it in the other ancient Near Eastern or cultures?
That's a whole new ballgame.
Is there like a one sentence version? You stand on one foot.
Other than the fact that it's known that if you obey the deity who sets the fates, it will be sweet. There's no one sentence way because it's complicated. Because later on, he cuts off their ability. They know as a category, if you obey a deity, that deity, if they are involved with the good fate, like it will work well for you. They know this, right? So if your city deity says, hey, do this, and you're in line, it'll go well. Now, they also know of ways to impact that. And so later on, the Lord just completely cuts them off.
Yeah, attempts to control are futile.
Yeah. You have no attempt. You have no successful attempt to all the ways that they know programmatically to affect change fail.
Well, that's cool.
But the Ruth thing is where the payoff is. The Ruth and the Exodus thing together is
All
where
right,
the
let's
payoff
go to
is.
Ruth.
I want to go there. Okay, so Ruth is very similar because in Ruth, Naomi, all her kids die and her husband dies. And she says, don't call me pleasant or good. Call me bitter. Call me Mara. Because the Lord has raised his hand against me. So she is viewing her life. So sometimes we're like, hey, Naomi, like, quit being such like a crybaby about this. But no. She is theologically evaluating her circumstances. She's saying, hey, clearly the Lord has, he's uttered a bad fate for me, a bitter fate. And this is bad. So the whole plot line, actually, the Book of Ruth, is how do we move this woman who is in a spot where she feels like it's a bitter fate to where at the end of the book, she has replaced the children and everybody's calling her again Naomi, pleasant, right? And then it's in the line of David, right? And so what's the commonality between Exodus 15 and Ruth is you're moving from bitter to pleasant or sweet. And the mechanism on both sides of that is Torah. You follow the Lord's instruction. So the mechanism is you have Boaz who's doing it, but even more you have Ruth who's doing it. Yeah. Ruth is the trigger for the whole thing. She just does it. So it's a fascinating thing in terms of like, how do we live, right? Because we all experience these moments where you look around and you're like, you come up to water, you're thirsty, you need water, but you can't drink. And you're like, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. There's nothing here. Or like everything is stripped away from me. All hope was stripped away from Mara. And she is not wrong for what she said. Mm-hmm. Because her fate was bitter. It really was. She lost her husband and her children. That is sad. And all she knows in her world is that the Lord must be against me. And the Lord doesn't show up and say, hey, stupid lady. He doesn't say that, right? The only mechanism to move her from that position, that grief, and the way she looks at herself, are these two people who just follow the heart of the Lord and shift her entire world. And in the end, Ruth isn't made great. Boaz isn't made great. You are revitalizing Naomi.
So one thing that I'm thinking about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Go ahead. No, one thing I'm thinking about is like if I were before this conversation, if I were to read Ruth, I think I would have thought, oh yeah, like you're saying, Naomi's complaining, she's whining, she doesn't know kind of what the Lord is doing behind the scenes, so to speak. Like, and so if I'm preaching that, I might go, well, I might think of her as a negative example, in the negative Naomi in the narrative. But I think in terms of the narrative, the things that you brought out, the fact that her perspective isn't corrected by the narrator, and what you're saying is like, well, this is kind of an accurate understanding from a particular worldview. I think that they would have been familiar with. She's speaking their language, so to speak, right? Yeah. Totally changes the way that I view Naomi, and it causes less issues with seeing her as kind of one of the main or the main character of the whole thing, right? That it's about getting her trajectory straightened out.
She's right. That's a huge thing. So that the reason that's helpful for you is when you see people and you're like, hey, they're just bickering because their situation is bad, Their situation is bad. And in that text, the Lord doesn't step in with like, again, thunderbolts and lightning. He uses Ruth, and he uses Ruth to then trigger Boaz, who goes, these people are just operating. The people on the ground functioning and living in the heart of Torah is the mechanism to, right? So it's the Torah following the Lord that moves people from bitter to sweet. Mm-hmm. It is a better life.
There might be a couple possible launching points from this. I think one is just the reality of lament as we see it here, and that she is right is affirmed in some way by the overwhelming presence of lament in Psalms. Is a valid thing to feel, and certainly folks aren't left there. The psalmist usually isn't. And then our participation perhaps in folks who are in a season of lament or suffering by living the ways of the Lord, following the Lord, being able to participate in this redemptive mini story, I guess, like Ruth and Boaz.
And the people that spot the suffering, like you are obliged. You think, oh, well, the Lord will come in. That's not how this place is built.
Yeah.
Torah, follow what the Lord said. You are the mechanism for this. That's Ruth.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's
Obeying
James 2 as well. Don't just say be warm
That's
and
right.
be filled.
That's right. Right? You're the mechanism. Be the freaking mechanism. Don't put the lady down and say, oh, well, look, she should have had more faith. Garbage. Her family is gone. She has no hope. It is bitter for her. Like, like that's real.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really like it.
As someone in ministry, you see people who are locked in their bitterness or their stuff, and you're like, oh, that's messy, and that's going to be time consuming, and we may steer clear of it. But the Book of Ruth is telling us that we need to press forward into that and demonstrate God's righteousness and what he says is good and how things should be to them.
Yes. Yeah. Like Ruth's scenario and Moses' scenario are both equally stupid. Right? Hey, Moses, throw this stick in there. Moses is like, oh my God. Like, really? Like, right? And Ruth's like, I'm going to go back as this single young lady, and I'm gonna help in this very patriarchal society. I'm gonna, but she doesn't think I'm gonna help. She's just like, whatever I can do, I'm gonna do, and she does it. But both cases, it is the obedience to the Lord that moves them from bitter faith to sweet faith.
Man, that's good stuff. I don't know if there's an easy segue right into a part 2. We might just have one long one here, but this has been pretty awesome, Scott. So thanks for this. I think we can suitably wrap up. Are we okay wrapping up? Don't hit stop yet, Andrew. We're not done, but we can wrap up here. I hear some things being poured in a celebratory fashion.
Yeah. Guys, there's lots of ice in there.
Oh, man. So, Andrew, thanks for being here. Thanks for your participation. Yep. And Susie, you too as well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Scott, you've given us about 6 more potential podcasts, so we'll have you back on here real soon with one of many other options. But we really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. See you later.
Thank you.
All right. And before we... Andrew, knock it off. I
can't tell when you're actually talking to like us as like off screen, and so I was only pouring that thinking I was off screen. I can't tell when we're like on.
#Pillar. We're always recording, Scott. You should know that. You got so much dirt on me recorded.
You have no idea.
So, hey guys, let's wrap this up. Let me talk about. We're right in the middle of our summer scholarship drive. And our goal is $100,000. We're just over $12,000 on our way towards that. So if you or someone you know would prayerfully consider participating with us and helping alleviate the cost of education that we are providing, that'd be very much appreciated. Also, if you or friends you know might want to come study with Scott with us at Pillar, applications are still being accepted. You can apply online at pillarseminary.org/apply. And we would love to have you. I'd love to pour into you more and then turn you into a future host of our podcast like Susie. Once you graduate, you're qualified to join us on the show. I'm just kidding. So.
Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.